Dark corners all around the globe. Martha recently sat down with a panel of experts to address invisible threats like those facing America. Here's part one of the future of warfare.
Cyber attacks and cybersecurity, two of the areas dominating President Biden's sit-down with Vladimir Putin this week. Yet another reminder of how threats from Russia and China and beyond are really changing the battlefield of the 21st century. The future of warfare is moving beyond explosions and gunfire into hacks on weapons and guidance systems, even invisible energy attacks. A panel of military and security experts joins me now. General Keith Kellogg, retired three-star general and former national security advisor to Vice President Pence. General Anthony Tata, retired Army brigadier general. And Morgan Wright, former senior advisor in the State Department's anti-terrorism assistance program. Gentlemen, thank you, all of you, for being here today. I think it's such an important discussion. I think a lot of people hear these names of hypersonic and cyber and bioweapon and wonder how the United States is preparing for the future of warfare. I'd like to start with this piece of sound from the president in Geneva. Watch this.
We agreed today to launch a bilateral strategic stability dialogue to work on a mechanism that can lead to control of new and dangerous and sophisticated weapons that are coming on the scene now, that reduce the times of response, that raise the prospects of accidental war. And we went into some detail of what those weapon systems were.
So, General Kellogg, let me start with you.
All right.
There's a couple levels here. One is how much can we really coordinate with other countries to come to any sort of agreements on what the parameters are with these things? I think that seems like a pretty difficult charge. And B, you, all three of you, identified cyber as the most dangerous, most imposing threat that we face in this world right now. Touch me a little bit about that.
Yeah, the first part is it's going to be very, very tough to work with other countries because we're so unique in our capacity and capabilities. But let me just do a quick jump to what you just asked about, because it's almost, where I come from, it's almost like a 51-49 split, cyber and bio warfare, because both of them are attacks from the unknown. They're just like, as the President Trump used to say, it's a silent enemy. And you have to address both. And you made a very good point about the future of warfare. We've come a long ways from crossbows and bows and arrows to gunpowder to nuclear. This is a new level of warfare that we had not seen before. And I think we need to start thinking about it, hard about it, because look what happened with the coronavirus that we're talking about. I mean, the potential of that coming inadvertently out of a lab as a bioweapon, it killed millions of people, over 600,000 in the United States. And then you see what happened with the cyber attack and the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline. And I live in Northern Virginia, and I saw what happened when the pumps were shut down and the panic buying was going on. If you combine both of those attacks of an enemy, you can shut down a nation pretty well. And I think we have to address that, and we have not done it. The words that President Biden talked about are a lot of words. I don't think he's figured it out yet. And I think somebody needs to sit down and say, okay, we are moving into a whole new area of warfare that we really hadn't thought about. And you can't look at them in silos. You can't say, okay, just talk about cyber warfare or just talk about bio. You're going to have to combine them both, because if I was an enemy, I would hit you with both simultaneously, and I'd break your back that way.
This is General Jack Keane talking about the private sector and the impact on the private sector and the need to work together on preventing these cyber attacks. Watch this.
Critical infrastructure of the United States, which is largely in the private sector, except for our nuclear weapons, is very, very vulnerable. This is finance and banking, telecommunications, utilities and energy infrastructure, and all of our major transportation, air and ground systems, rail, etc. That is largely exposed.
General Tata, you have a long military experience. You also write fiction books that are based on the reality of the future of warfare. When you hear him talking about paralyzing our financial systems, our infrastructure systems, transportation systems, is that a real potential reality for the United States?
Yeah, Martha, it is. And also, I served as Secretary of Transportation of the state of North Carolina. So seaports, I had 72 airports I was in charge of, all the highways there. You think about what General Kellogg was just talking about, these attacks, these cyber attacks that can happen, that can shut down commerce at a seaport, that can change the Amber Alert on a highway, that can scare people. Think about what happened in Hawaii that time that there was a false alert that a missile was inbound to Hawaii. All of those things, the enemy can penetrate, as they demonstrated with the Colonial Pipeline and the meat processing plant and so forth. And so our infrastructure right now is a key vulnerability, in the state and local governments in particular have a hard time with, they don't have a lot of money to spend on cyber defense. And so when we think about cyber warfare, we have to think in terms of defense and also, how we hunt forward, what we do to be able to disrupt enemy around the world that are trying to attack us and do these things. And it's, as General Kellogg said, it's a silent enemy. It's a really tough enemy to get after, because you really don't know about it until it's been done. And it's so classified that we really can't talk about tactics, techniques, and procedures as well. And as far as entering into bilateral agreements, why would an enemy that's really perhaps got an advantage on us, asymmetric advantage, give away their state secrets? Why would they trade off when, we're the, United States, most powerful country in the world? Why would somebody say, okay, we're going to enter in this agreement that prevents us from debilitating you, when in fact our whole purpose is to debilitate the United States?
How good are we at retaliating is the question. So if they're able to take down the Colonial Pipeline, can we do the same thing in Russia?
We can, but we're the good guys. We fight with one hand tied behind our back. We don't go after other countries' critical infrastructure except in a time of war. Now, what happened with Colonial was the first time that a criminal ransomware group has actually replaced a state actor as a true threat against critical infrastructure. They did what normally you only do during war, which is take out an adversary's critical infrastructure. So I think what's happening here is as long as these gangs are allowed to operate with the implicit approval of Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or the Ayatollahs, we have to get back to the Bush Doctrine, which says if you harbor terrorists or cyber criminals, you now cross that line where it says now you're just as responsible as the terrorists.
The threat of biological warfare and the panel's take on what happened in Wuhan. That's next.
I'm one of those guys who says, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, swims like a duck, it's probably a duck. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened out there is, I really do think that's the reason I believe in inadvertent release.
Biological warfare involves the use of things like toxins and viruses to cause destruction. And it's gotten a lot of attention recently as a small group floats the unconfirmed possibility of an intentional leak of COVID from a lab in China. Here's part 2 of the future of warfare.
Let's talk about biological warfare. First of all, do you agree? Do you think this came out of the lab?
I believe it did.
Yeah.
I do believe in inadvertent release, yes.
Okay. Here's David Asher, who worked for the State Department investigation, talking about that back at the end of March. Watch this.
But what we learned was so horrifying about the implications of what China is doing with viruses as a weapons vector. Many people said, oh, viruses aren't a very effective weapons vector. Well, look what's happened to the world.
So to what General Kellogg was just saying, Martha, is that what China did was they shut down all internal travel when they knew they had a problem. And then they continued to let international travel go. They knew how contagious this was. So whether or not it came from the lab or accidentally on purpose or was in a wet market, China made deliberate decisions that facilitated the spread of this virus around the world. And they had to know the impact because they knew the impact internally. Mm-hmm. And so that was a deliberate decision. You could call that an attack. I certainly do. And so China should be held responsible for that. As General Kellogg said, over 600,000 Americans killed, over 3 million citizens in the world. If China accidentally released a nuke that killed 600,000 Americans, what would our response be?
That's a great point.
Would it be the same?
So what does the future look like, General Kellogg, with regard to bioweapons warfare, and what are we doing to keep America safe?
There's a biological weapons convention, a treaty that was signed in 1972. We signed it. The Chinese acceded to it as well, meaning they're a partner with it to do it, which in the first article of that says prevent from any development of biological weapons. And this goes whole circle back to this whole discussion on gain of function. Why are we supporting gain of function? All gain of function does, it increases the transmissibility of a disease, of a pathogen, and also how severe it is. And we're funding that, and we gave money to China to do that. And going back to what Tony said, because it's an interesting point, people forget that Wuhan is a city of 11 million people. It's 5 times geographically the size of London. It was shut down militarily. They quarantined that city. They built hospitals overnight. They forcibly evacuated people who had gotten sick into those hospitals. I'm one of those guys who says, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, swims like a duck, it's probably a duck. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened out there is, I really do think that's the reason I believe in inadvertent release. And we have a lot of people early on said, this is not there. And I candidly, I kind of fault our doctors, the doctors group we had that kind of said, no, initially, it wasn't, no. Now they're starting to come around. You see what Bob Redfield is saying. They said, oh, no, we're doing it. I said, we saw that early on, and we were pushed back on.
Can you shed any light for us on what that dynamic was like within the administration?
Well, early on, it was Robert O'Brien, myself, Matt Pottinger, the deputy NSA. And Matt Pottinger was a Wall Street Journal reporter in Wuhan when the first SARS epidemic came back. And he walked in, and we were all 3 of us in the Oval Office with the president. And Matt Pottinger said very clearly, they're not telling you the truth. This is wrong. Something's happened in China, and they're not being forthcoming about it. And they weren't. So we went into the doctors group, and there were 6 doctors we had, everything from Bob Redfield, Tony Fauci, Francis Collins, and the rest of them. And we said, hey, what is the possibility of this coming out of the lab? And to a man, they said, no, it didn't. Well, and a woman, because Debbie Birx was there. Mm-hmm. Well, later, as it started to go on, said, this does not feel right. Something's wrong out there. And, of course, early on, Tony Fauci went out there and told the entire world, no, it didn't happen. It's not through the Lancet article, through 27 scientists that we now found he had some culpability there that he never told anybody about, that he was actually involved with the editor of Lancet and what happened out there. Now they're kind of saying, well, it may have come out of there. It may have been a release, inadvertent release. And I like all of us here, we believe it actually happened. But because of that, the doctors group pushing back on us, a lot of people kind of stepped back. And the major pieces of the media that, oh, no, you're wrong about that, it's not true. We kind of stepped back a little bit and said, well, maybe we don't have this right. Well, I think we're going to be proven correct as we go down the line. This was a release. At the very start, the president asked us repeatedly, could this have come out of the lab through a mistake or deliberate? And I happen to believe, like Robert O'Brien and Matt Pottinger did, and we told the president that, and the vice president, yeah, we need to consider that very strongly.
I want to dig into the issue of direct energy attacks that China has been working on for some time, and hypersonic weapons, which go 5 to 6 times the speed of sound, which are being developed by countries all around the world to the extent that they can. This is one individual who believes that he was attacked, and we have spoken with him on the show, when he was in Moscow working undercover for the United States intelligence agencies. Watch what happened to him.
It was December of 2017 in a Moscow hotel room. I woke up with an incredible case of vertigo, tinnitus, which is ringing in my ears. I felt like I was going to be sick. I had spent years in war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd been, in pretty precarious situations, but this was the most, terrifying experience of my life.
General Tata, how seriously do you take these direct energy attacks? Because for a while, they were not taken very seriously, and Mark Paulus has been one of the outspoken people who believes they're very real and that it impacted him.
Well, it's a very serious threat, Martha, whether it's directed energy against personnel, such as happened in the consulate there in Cuba, or all the way up to directed energy attacks against major systems that can disable our own air defenses, our own systems for defense of the nation. And so when you layer hypersonics into that, you can direct energy against our air defense systems, and which have a hard enough time with hypersonics, and then you can fly hypersonics in to do whatever damage and whatever targets that they want to hit. So this is a cutting-edge form of warfare, and it's something that we really need to take seriously. I know DARPA and other agencies countries are taking a hard look at this, but if we think that we're unprepared for information operations and cyber warfare and bio warfare, this is a much more kinetic form of warfare that is on the cutting edge.
I'd love to ask each one of you, if you had one thing that you would say, please listen to this, to the new administration, what keeps you up at night? General Kellogg, we'll start with you.
I think what keeps me up at night with the new administration is the question I have of will. One thing that President Trump had, he had the willingness to go to the mat, as we used to say, to go after you, and he wouldn't take time doing it. And we proved that with Soleimani, we proved that with Baghdadi, we proved that in a lot of cases. My thing, the thing that keeps me up at night is, does this administration have the will to protect America by going after somebody really hard? And I hate to say this because he's our current president, but his track record isn't real good. Remember, he is the individual who did not want to go after Osama bin Laden, sat in the Situation Room and didn't want to go there. And that's what keeps me up. Are we willing to go fight when we need to go fight to protect the American people?
General Tata?
An incurious press, I think, is our biggest threat. You heard General Kellogg talk about the internal dynamics. You had Matt Pottinger, Wuhan reporter, talk about what was happening there as the Deputy National Security Advisor. And when you think about how the media, once they found out that the virus and writ large was harmful to the Trump presidency, doubled down on everything that this was man-made, and there wasn't even we weren't even allowed to question whether or not this came from a lab, which would have supported the president's position of being tough on China. And so an incurious press that's advocating for the administration and doesn't look hard so that we can get at the root causes of what our enemies and competitors are doing could be a huge detractor going downstream here as we try to muster will, as General Kellogg just said, of the nation to fight our enemies, because self-preservation is job number one of our military.
Great point. I mean, it undercuts the integral importance of a free press in a democracy.
That's exactly right.
It's a check and balance.
They're advocates as opposed to looking at the real facts.
Yeah. Morgan Wright, what keeps you up at night?
I think it's the thing is that because it's not sexy and we don't see the ones and zeros, we don't take it as seriously. We saw the Colonial Pipeline. What I'm concerned about, I think the recent executive order starts getting there when they started talking about deploying new advanced technology called endpoint detection and response. I just had a meeting with folks that came out of the classified community, the National Nuclear Stockpile folks. Everybody's trying to implement this. What I'm concerned is that we take our eye off the ball, that we start doing something and we take our eye off the ball. We are getting our rear ends handed to us right now by China in the area of quantum computing. Why is that so important? If they breach and they get that beachhead in quantum computing and get a significant presence, which they have with quantum communication and satellites, they'll be able to break any of our encryption that fast. Our secrets will no longer be able to be protected. The things that we thought would be safe for years will not be safe anymore. And so because you can't see it, that to me is the greatest danger. You can't see a 1 and 0. But when you see an attack on a pipeline, we're talking about when you see the gas lines and people are overreacting, what will they do if it's a real shortage, if a pipeline is really taken out and they actually blow up something and there's nothing there anymore? So for me, that's kind of my concern, is that we start down this path, but we take our eye off the ball.
We better be educating young people in the next generation to do the kind of work that you're talking about.
It's ones and zeros.
And that's a fear of mine in terms of our education system and how well we're preparing young minds for the challenges that face us. Morgan Wright, thank you very much. General Tata, thank you. General Kellogg, great to have you with us today. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Martha.
Thanks, Martha.